Okay, this afternoon I'm with Mickey and David. They're going to give us an update on the progress of this campaign. Over to you guys.
Okay, basically, as most people know, I've been back, having left my home in New York just over a year ago, and we've exposed the lies along the way, from being told certain people did not exist, to denials of freedom of information. The protests kind of escalated to September the 8th last year, when we invaded the council house and caused the abandonment of their meeting, which caused a total shutdown in terms of communication with the city of Nottingham, and there's no communication whatsoever with them, and we've just piled on the pressure as the lies have been exposed. The biggest one that we exposed was their denial around a certain former director of social services who was my alleged child rapist. It wasn't until a second meeting with Paddy Tipping, the local crime commissioner, who initially denied knowing the former director, that we got the truth out of Mr. Tipping. Mr. Tipping, in my personal view, is there's a few things that may be questionable about him. I'm not very happy at him, but we got the truth in the end. It would have caused me a lot less stress than what it did, and he come out and did what he did back in November, when myself and David and several other people had a meeting with him at his office, and when we was talking about the structure of the social services and the council as a whole, I was given a nod and a wink by someone that was present in the room, and I find back in the question, well, you must remember that the former director, I mentioned him by name as Alan Smith, and I don't have a problem today naming him, because through our research we've ascertained his true identity. But the reaction we got from Paddy Tipping was, oh, he was my boss.
So they've been denying that for a long time?
Oh yeah, I mean, the City Council in 2013 actually said that they checked their records. There's no Mr. Smith, who was the deputy head of social services. That came from a woman called Dawn Collinson, and the now chief executive in Courier, who was at the time in charge of social services until they brought in Alison Michalska. But the information was actually relayed by Ian Courier to me, and what more can you say? Ian Courier is a liar, in the sense that he gave me the information. As far as I'm concerned, he should have checked that information, because based on what Paddy Tipping told us, he was the boss of the city social services that ran also the county council until they lost control of it in 1974. And Paddy Tipping states quite clearly, and I believe that's also the statement made to Operation Daybreak, that he was the director of social services from the city, and he transferred to the county under that same freedom of information request, in the public's interest, which I believe is in the corporate county council. They say quite clearly it is in the public's interest that they neither admit nor deny that this person was who I say he was. Under the freedom of information, I asked them to clarify that one Alan Smith was the director of social services, and all we get is silence. Anthony May, the chief executive, actually told me, after the city denied me my freedom of information request, that if I gave that same request to him, he'd have the answer within 3 or 4 days. He actually wrote out a copy of the FOI that I'd given the city and handed it to their lawyer, Jeff Russell. And within 3 or 4 working days, I had the response. It's in the public's interest.
So, what's your take on this, David?
Well, I came into this because quite clearly what was happening was survivors were acting almost independently. And there was a group that supported Mickey. There were other survivors, but they weren't really being pulled together in any sort of unified way. And what the councils and the police were able to do was to isolate individuals, give them a single point of contact, which kept them isolated. And quite clearly, we would be stronger together rather than as separate survivors. Now, I'm not a survivor, but Mickey's an ex-soldier, and so I offered Mickey my support as someone that has worked at a relatively high level within the services, and therefore understood the sort of administrative and corporateness of the councils, that I could probably engage them at their level. Quite clearly, they had shut down and they were not communicating, and we were not going to get anywhere unless we actually found a space to have that communication. So what I was able to do, whilst Mickey and his supporters and other survivors were keeping public awareness going and protest on the street and just keeping the council knowledge that they were there and they weren't going to go away, was to find a space for me to start to begin to engage people like Paddy Tipping at the Police and Crime Commissioners, and writing to Chris Ayres, the Nottingham Chief Constable, to begin to bring some organisational structure to the survivors group. And by doing that, by bringing those survivors in, we were able to show that we had an ability to communicate to the survivors and act as a mediatory point between what the authorities were doing with the police operations like Daybreak and Xeris, and also begin to challenge the council's position on wanting to hold an internal safeguarding review, whereas what the survivors were wanting was a public inquiry. Now, and of course we needed to be conscious that we weren't doing this in isolation within Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, but actually it sat within the broader Westminster inquiry into institutionalised child sexual abuse whilst children were in care. So we've been working on the different levels, both nationally and locally. We've got to a position, we think, and I say we think because we are a gnat's breadth away from getting confirmation, that Nottingham will be included into the Westminster inquiry. The way they're going to do it, to see whether there was a national picture to this institutionalised child abuse, is to take a number of regions and deal with each of those regions in isolation first, and then see what the linkages are between those regions. Now, inevitably, people will be quite well versed with some of the regions which will become, which are obvious, like Rochdale, like Rotherham, like South Oxfordshire. Quite clearly, those have already been out, and public awareness, and inquiries have taken place. Nottingham is unique in that it hasn't yet had a public inquiry, so it's still very much under people's radar. But we think Nottingham will be taken in to the Westminster inquiry. What that will allow us to do is to bring even more pressure onto the two councils, both not city and the county councils, to agree to hold a public inquiry. That's what we've been pushing them for. We want it based on the kind of Leveson exemplar, where Leveson decided to do part 1 and part 2. Part 2 is the who did what to whom when, the kind of criminality aspect, and that will ensure that the inquiry can take place by looking at part 1, which is much more the environmental, much more about what did people know, what was done in the past, what were the circumstances in which things happened. So much more that environmental. And it can run then in parallel with the police operations without prejudicing the police operation. Obviously, any survivor that comes forward and gives evidence which is collaborative or new, we can actually make sure that they are passed to the police so they can carry on with their investigations. And we can begin the inquiry. We can give the survivors what they want, which is that platform for their voices to be heard. And it can say to the people that are in charge that, up with this we will not put, this should not be happening in our name. I didn't, support this. I do not endorse this. People have a right to know what happened in the past, and they need to be assured that things are now in place that will never allow this to happen again. So that's what we want. As I said, we are not that far away from getting confirmation that Nottingham will be on the Westminster inquiry, and that will give us great leverage in then getting Nottingham councils to agree to hold the public inquiry. We're getting broader support for that inquiry to take place. The councils have shifted their position and are now saying that whatever inquiry is that does take place will engage the survivors. We're pulling the survivors together and getting organised. That, in conjunction with other people that are engaged, that in conjunction with the survivors that the police already know about and have interviewed, gives us a very good base to push forward on. And so we're relatively hopeful that in the not too distant future we will begin to work with the councils to start to set the terms and conditions and identify people that the survivors would be happy with that will make up the panel. And as soon as you get to that position where we're talking to the councils about the processes and the mechanisms of that inquiry, then for me, we've crossed the start line. The inquiry has in effect begun. The councils will have to go public, because that way they'll have to bring in the broader and wider people and organisations that are interested in this particular issue. And once it goes public, once we get that start point of a working group to draw up the terms of reference and panel composition, then I think the survivors will know that they are at last seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, where they can have their voice, it can be listened to, we can identify what went on, who was at fault, what happened, why it happened, how was it allowed to happen, what did people know, what did they do about it, or more to the point, what they didn't do about it, and start to hold people to account, because it's not just the crime that has been committed against the individual, it's actually that crime has been extended into their whole life. Because they've been ignored or they've not been listened to, and we need to bring that sort of atmospheric to an end. That's not what I want to see in a modern Britain, and we need to be in a position where it will never be allowed to happen again, and people will not turn their faces away from something which is quite evidently wrong.
Is there going to be, is there anything that you'd like to update the viewers with since the last time you really put any information out?
I don't think there's anything specific we can formally say. We've engaged there. It is wider than just child abuse whilst in care. Child abuse, has been going on in Nottingham and has been covered up in the past, such as the so-called satanic abuses case in the early 90s, or the Leona White case, which saw the resignation of David White, and he then went on to be Chief Executive of Norfolk County Council. And you kind of say, hang on a minute, how can somebody be in charge of something where something went wrong and yet it still progresses, in a kind of promotional sense? And we've got to bring, those sort of people to account. So we will be very keen to make sure that whilst the Westminster case is looking purely at the institutionalised aspect of the child abuse, here in Nottingham we want to make sure it's as broad as possible. Whether it's talking about children being taken away from their parents without proper diligence and their parents having proper ability to defend their positions in court, or whether it's about child abuse that happened outside of the institutions but we still know it's child abuse and it's still happening, or whether indeed it is about the care homes and what did we know about the care homes, where were they authorised. And more than that, we know that people have in the past reported their concerns to the police and to the social services. You know, what happened to those reports? Why were they not acted upon? You know, and it's those sort of issues that need to be addressed. And even today, you know, we will be asking even today the councillors of Nottingham City Council, what did they know, when did they know it, and why didn't they do anything about it? So, you know, we're pretty clear about where we want to go to, we're pretty clear about what we want as an outcome. We're close to crossing that kind of start line, as I said, you know, and moving there. The first brick in that wall will be the confirmation that Nottingham is part of the broader Westminster inquiry. That gets the legal support, that gets the financial support, and that really puts the county council and the city council under due warning that you know, they're taking it at the national level. Now is the time not to cover up and carry on denying or hiding behind, don't want to prejudice the ongoing police operation. You know, now is the time to say that let's start this inquiry, let's start engaging with survivors, and let's start to move to a solution.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, you know, in addition to that, you know, we some of the things that we have uncovered along the way is being told that I was never in a specific place as well. I've produced the evidence that supports that, and handed it over, and yet they're still in denial. I've had a lot of run-ins with Nottinghamshire Police as some of the videos that we've previously done have shown, even down to having a confrontation with Chief Constable Chris Eyre. That man's beyond contempt, but they're my own personal feelings. But in the end, you know, what it comes down to is they're covering each other's backs. I mean, in my case alone, I went to the police in 2003 and they failed to investigate. We're in the process of giving the final pieces of the jigsaw to that IPCC investigation that started in 2014, and when that goes forward, they'll be exposed for what they are. You know, in 2003, they weren't interested, just the same as the council weren't interested. The two statements from my 2003 police interview at Canning Circus Police Station in Nottingham, they've disappeared. My records have disappeared. But they say that my records were destroyed in 1978. Well, I have a computer screenshot from one of their computers that shows the date of, I believe it's the 1st of the 1st, 89, which was when the Children's Act came in, to a date in 2004. Well, what were they deleting from there if all my records were destroyed in 1978? Well, I can tell you what they were destroying. They were destroying the call logs, because I called the council after the police investigation collapsed to try and get them to work with me back in 2003. Now, every call that I made, and I made 3 or 4 a week for about 6 or 7 weeks, every one of those calls would have been logged because of the nature of the call. Now, under the Data Protection Act, I've tried to get that, and all they say is they have no records. Everything you want from them, they have no records. And even when there are records available, they're actually closed till year 2050, 2055, 2057. Right? How can I get any justice? How can any other survivor get justice? You know, and then we come more into recent times. Similar scenario with the police, because a lot of things that have happened as a result of actions between the police and the council, which I say is collusion. I've had to go to a few police interviews, and David's been a part of one of them, where I lodged a complaint against Superintendent Helen Chamberlain. Now, the stuff that I wanted to say to Helen Chamberlain was about the bigger picture of where I came into all of this, where they failed to set up a video interview in New York, to all the things that led up to me being eventually interviewed by a UK police officer that took from July 2013 till December of last year. Now that interview only took place because a news reporter for the Mansfield Chad, Nick Frayne, who exposed the cover-up via the media along with other sources that we have, put it out on front page about the cover-up and then put "Find My Rapist Before I Do." Well, when they read "Find My Rapist Before I Do," their thoughts obviously were, he's going to go and get him. And that was when Alan Smith was brought in for questioning. And it doesn't stop there, because they told me that he'd been arrested and interviewed under caution. He'd been invited in for questioning under caution and told he may have to come back at a later date. Now, every other person that's been brought in for questioning under Operation Daybreak, it's been reported in the Nottingham Post and the Mansfield Chad and other local news resources. There's a certain person, unnamed, who give their age, has been interviewed, and we have a total news media blackout on Alan Smith. Well, here we don't have a news media blackout because I don't have a problem in identifying who he is. He is my alleged rapist. He is the person that Paddy Tipping identifies as the Director of Social Services, and he is the one that the City Council, via Ian Currier and Dawn Collinson, deny ever existed. And I don't know whether David has anything else to say.
Well, I think what is clear, and people need to be very clear about this, is, you know, that there was a crime perpetrated against Mickey by an individual many years ago, and that's one thing, and that's what the police operations are looking at, which is the criminality aspect. And it is important that that is dealt with, but as important to the survivors is this whole trail of destructiveness and obscuration which has been taken place to deny that it ever took place in the first place. You know, and that to me is as criminal as the act itself, and has just continued the effect of that abuse throughout survivors' lives. You know, and if Mickey's just given you a kind of clear expose of one survivor's story and what has happened to him and his records and the way that he has been dealt with. Well, that is replicated in all of the other survivors who have all got similar stories. And all of those stories need to come out now. You know, we need to put it onto the table and actually find out why it was allowed to happen in that way. Why did they destroy the records? You know, let's get the access to those records which are protected. Let's make sure police officers, because the vast majority of the rank and file police are as abhorred by what has gone on as anybody else. We've got police officers that have come to us and told us that in the mid-70s and 80s they submitted cases to the DPP which went nowhere. So, you know, there are police officers out there who are prepared to come forward. Some are still concerned about the Official Secrets Act and whether they would be subject to that by giving evidence. We need to find a way of enabling the former police officers or even current serving police officers to come forward without detriment to their careers or also their pensions, or for fear of prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. So, you know, they can bring witness to what went on and why it went on. That whole environmental collusion, conspiracy, you know, why was that allowed to foster, and why has there been this silence about this, when it is clear that, you know, you can't deny that abuse took place. And I don't think anybody these days is going to put their hands and say it wasn't institutionalized. I think it's very clear that it was institutionalized. People knew about it. They may not have been doing it themselves, but they were aware and they covered up. Well, okay, we want to hold you to account. I'm sorry, you looked the other way when something wrong was going on. And you need to answer for your actions. So we'll get there. We'll get the inquiry. We'll get Mickey's story out there, which will open up a whole raft of questions that people will have to ask and answer. And there will be other survivors who will do exactly the same. Many will sound very similar to Mickey's story. Others will be different, and it will open up new avenues for investigation. But eventually we will get to the truth. We will find out what happened and what went wrong and why it went wrong. And we'll make sure that the recommendations come out to ensure that it never, ever happens again.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap things up from my perspective, we've got this far, and I believe that we're going to get to where we need to go in the end. But we have whistleblowers, even currently coming to us, right? We had one last year that came to us and came to our reporter in Mansfield, terrified to tell us exactly what's going on in terms of whistleblowing at social services level within the city and the county, because she would lose her job, a pension, and a pension payoff would actually finish off her mortgage. So if she comes forward, they sniff a little rat, and what they do, they bully and intimidate them out so that they're forced into leaving, and when they leave, they lose all their pension rights. So is somebody going to give up a lifetime's work, you know, to blow the whistle, you know? And how does the members of the public feel about that? You know, people being backed into a corner, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. And that's the society that we live in today. But we do have current whistleblowers that are coming to us. We're averaging about one a week at the moment, and the latest one gives some really detailed revelations, not only into how the social services run today, but how they ran back then, and the psychological effects, because this other whistleblower went on to work in the psychiatric field as a psychiatric nurse. And every protest that we've done, someone comes to us, I worked there, or I was a policeman and I reported this. Well, the only thing I can say is John Collins, Ian Currier, Alison Michalska, the City Council, Alan Rhodes, Anthony May, Steve Evans, the County Council, and maybe even Chris Eyre. Your times are coming, just the same as ours is coming. Have a nice day.
You should hang your heads in shame, councillors!